What is meant by atheism?
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plank. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today we're going to be looking at a clip from Catholic apologist Matt Fradd when he very recently visited the Ben Shapiro show. You all know Ben Shapiro, he's this guy.
These are facts, and facts don't care about your feelings.
And yet, he's constantly appealing to his feelings over facts, never more so than when the subject comes to religion and how the facts, more and more as science advances, don't support the idea of the Judeo-Christian God that Ben so feels to be true. And all of his attempts to fast-talk his positions into seeming reasonable fall apart when they're closely examined. And today, he's interviewing this fellow, Matt Fradd, who you may know from the YouTube channel Pints with Aquinas. And their discussion turned to the topic of atheism. And you know, when Jewish and Catholic faithful get together and talk about atheists, they're just going to totally properly represent us, and there's going to be no straw manning or incorrect assumptions about the non-believer positions at all.
Do I detect a note of sarcasm?
Are you kidding me? This baby is off the charts.
And though the two talked about theology for over an hour, we're just going to focus on the parts relevant to the idea of atheism today. So let's get into it and see what these two towering intellects have to say about non-believers. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe, click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including Patreon and Twitter, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, who is truly all about facts and absolutely does not give a good algorithm's damn about your feelings about God. May it keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
What is meant by atheism? I think there's been something of a shift since the new atheists that would seek to redefine atheism to mean something indistinguishable from agnosticism. It seems to me, though, that there are three basic ways you can answer the question, does God exist? Yes, no, or maybe. And so it seems appropriate to me that there should be three terms that would identify the possessors of each belief. Atheist, theist, or agnostic.
Well, for starters, you're asking the wrong question. The question should not be, does God exist? Because if every person answered that question absolutely honestly, everyone would have to give the same answer. I don't know for sure. Because no one can give a justified, definitive answer to that question. So when people answer yes, no, or maybe to that question, what they're actually saying is that they've been convinced that a God exists. They've been convinced that a God does not exist, or they haven't been convinced either way. But even that is rather unimportant if you're attempting to determine a theistic label for people. Because whether or not people are convinced of a proposition really only points to their epistemological standard. Whether or not they have a relatively high or low bar when it comes to what they would consider compelling, convincing evidence of something.
Far from raising the bar or the epistemic standard that Christianity must meet to be believed, I lower it.
Surely a much better question when attempting to assign a theistic or philosophical label would be, do you believe God exists? Because that will much more accurately get to what specifically the person in question believes in regards to the God claim, not just what their epistemological standard is. Because either you do believe that God exists, or you do not believe that God exists. And if you say that you don't know whether or not you believe in God, or that maybe you believe in God but you're not sure, then you don't actually believe in God. Currently, in this moment, when you are answering the question, you don't believe in God if the answer is anything other than yes. By default, if it's anything other than yes, it's a no. Because belief is nothing more, nothing less than acceptance that a statement is true or that something exists, or trust, faith, or confidence in someone or something. If your answer to, do you believe in God, is, I don't know, then you do not, at present, accept the God claim as true. doesn't mean that you're asserting that it's false, just that you don't accept it as true. If your answer to do you believe that God exists is maybe, then you don't have trust, faith, or confidence in the God claim. Because maybe isn't very confident, is it? So if you're asking the proper question, a question about belief, and that is the proper question since belief in God is literally what we're talking about here, then it gets you to a true dichotomy. You either believe in God or you don't. And then from there, you can break those two groups down into further subgroups. But attempting to position agnostics as their own separate group, distinctly different from theist and atheist, well, this runs you into all sorts of problems. For instance, there are both agnostic atheists and agnostic theists. So there are agnostics who go to church every Sunday, say their prayers before bed every night, believe in God, and are convinced to their satisfaction that He is up there, hearing their prayers and watching out for every person. But they're honest enough to say that they don't know whether or not God exists. And so you would categorize them as an agnostic and put them in an entirely different group from the theists, even though they're functionally the same as theists. And likewise, there are agnostic atheists who do not believe in God, who are maybe naturalists or materialists, who don't subscribe to any religious belief, and, if pressed on the issue, would say that they're convinced to their satisfaction that God does not exist. But they're honest enough to say that they don't know whether or not God exists. And so you would categorize them as agnostics and put them in an entirely different group from the atheists, even though they're functionally the same as an atheist. This makes no sense. It makes no sense to insist upon a third grouping of people who fundamentally disagree with one another when it comes to what their beliefs are, and agree almost entirely with one of the other two groups. But you want to separate them out from those groups merely for the fact that they don't claim certainty about their beliefs? No, it makes much more sense to organize the groups based on belief first, because that gets you two groups, theists and atheists. And then from there, you can subgroup them. I mean, you have to subgroup them anyway. Once you have all the theists in a group, you have to start subgrouping them based on their differing religious beliefs. But no, apologists have long attempted to separate agnostic atheists into their own separate category from the hard atheists, because this makes it easier for them to do their apologetics. I mean, if you know you're dealing with an agnostic atheist, there's a greater likelihood of convincing them, or they will likely be less adamant in their non-belief than a hard atheist would be. So separating agnostic atheists into their own group is just a little easier on the apologist. And when the apologist disparages atheists in their talks and sermons, and insists that the atheists are all hard-headed, close-minded, hate-filled, rigid God deniers, it makes them seem kind of foolish when a very large percentage of the atheist community turn out to be agnostic atheists and non-resistant non-believers. So, no, I do not believe that God exists, and that makes me an atheist. The fact that I leave room for the possibility that I may be wrong doesn't take away from that non-belief. It doesn't spin me off into a third category. I'm an agnostic atheist. I don't know whether God exists or not, but I don't believe He does.
Only the theist and the atheist has a burden of proof because they're the only ones claiming something. So I think that would be the first way to go about it.
And, of course, that is the other reason that apologists want to separate out the agnostics from the hard atheists. Because if most of the atheist community are agnostic atheists, then it's tough to claim that atheists have any kind of burden of proof. Someone not believing in God does not automatically mean that they have to prove that God does not exist. But if you can separate out all the agnostic atheists and leave only the militant, no God exists and I'm sure of it atheists, then they do have a burden of proof for the positive claim that they're making. I mean, I guess it's far too difficult to just ask an atheist, hey, are you claiming that God does not exist, or just that you don't believe that God exists, in order to find out their burden of proof? No. Far better to force those with no burden of proof into a separate category entirely and deny them a part of their philosophical identity in order to make your apologetic debating slightly more convenient for you.
Of course. How selfish of me. Let's do all the things that you want to do.
Are there good reasons to think that atheism is true? Are there good reasons to think that theism is true?
You mentioned there the kind of shift in the new atheist community from atheism to agnosticism, and that is clearly what has happened. I mean, there used to be an argument militantly anti-God, and God for certain does not exist. You're a fool if you believe in religion or in a deity, and that has moved into pretty solidly, well, I don't know and I don't care. So how would you engage that particular argument? Because that seems to be the more common one in today's day and age. And even people who tend to think that they're theists will say things like, I'm spiritual but not religious, which is effectively indifferent about the presence of God in their lives. How do you engage in the agnostic argument?
And so, right there, Ben, you basically admit that agnosticism can encompass both believer and non-believer. Claims that people who say they are spiritual but not religious is effectively displaying indifference about the possibility of God in their lives. So you can be a spiritual person, believing in spirits, souls, an afterlife, even God, but not kowtowing to a particular theology, and therefore you count, in their minds, as an agnostic. Even though that person, the spiritual believer, has effectively nothing in common with the agnostic atheist who is not spiritual, who does not believe in any kind of a deity, even an unspecified one. But they want to force those two philosophically disparate people into the same camp. It makes me wonder, where would these two theistic intellectual titans place deists? Deists being people who believe in the existence of God, that God created the universe, but does not control life, affect natural phenomena, or provide supernatural revelations. They think that God is effectively absent from all of our lives. Would that be the same as spiritual but not religious to Ben? And would deists, people who affirmatively believe in God, then be placed in the same camp as agnostic atheists who do not affirm the existence of God? More people being removed from the groups they most closely align with and forced into a separate group just filled and ever more filling with more and more people that they fundamentally disagree with.
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
First of all, I just want to say, obviously there are atheists who have arguments against God's existence, and there are very intelligent atheists, but you're right, a lot of people just don't care. It seems to me that if God does not exist, we have dogmatic answers to the most important questions we're all most interested in asking. Like, where did I come from? Why am I here? Who am I? How should I live? And where am I going?
I always love it when theists insert things they are most interested in and then assert that these things are what everyone is interested in. These questions are the most important questions. I mean, I've encountered some variation of these questions from apologists time and time again.
I had all these students, 21 years old, and I realized that no one had ever sat them down, not even once in their entire career in education, and said, okay, who do you want to be? Like, what sort of person is it that you want to be? Not job, it's like character. What do you want your life to be like? What should it be like? And what shouldn't it be like? And like, write about that seriously, like your life depends on it, because it does.
The reason religions are so popular is because they try to answer these 5 big questions. How did I get here? Why am I here? How should I live? How should I deal with moral failure? And where am I going when I die?
For starters, there are plenty of people who do not have or care to have answers to these kinds of philosophical questions at all. I mean, try to ask these things of a single mother trying to get her kids off to the babysitter and not be late for her shift at her 3rd job, which she has to have in order to make ends meet and keep food on the table for her kids. Ask her what she thinks of these philosophical questions. She probably won't even let you finish the questions before she has to rush out the door. She's got things to do. Frankly, most people throughout most of human history have been too taken with dealing with the rigors of this harsh world to really ponder philosophy. These kinds of questions have long been the navel-gazing self-indulgence of the extremely privileged. I mean, that's why common religions have been so popular. The common formula is give the masses a simplistic theology that purports to answer all of these questions about life, death, and the great hereafter. Make sure that that theology insists upon hefty tithing to the church, and then keep the masses so busy toiling away that they can't ever really stop and ponder these questions more closely. After all, idle hands are the devil's playthings, am I right? Because if they did, they might find that the theology that they were indoctrinated into doesn't quite answer those questions in a satisfactory manner. And yeah, there are plenty of people who, even when considering those questions, don't particularly care about the answers, or even care to have any answers to them at all. And still, there are others who can answer those questions for themselves rather easily, and secularly. I myself can. What were those questions again?
Like, where did I come from?
The fusion of my mother's egg and my father's sperm.
Why am I here?
My parents had sex, causing that egg and sperm to meet.
Who am I?
I'm me, Professor Plink.
How should I live and where am I going?
I should live in accordance with my values and personal moral framework, which I've developed over my lifetime based upon an amalgamation of my experiences, perspectives, and thoughts. Where am I going? Down the metaphorical road that is my life, trying to live it in accordance with those values and morals, and heading towards the inevitable destination of death. May it be as far off down the road and getting there as pleasant of a drive as possible.
It struck me that if God doesn't exist, then here are the answers. Where did I come from? I've been coughed into existence by a blind cosmic process that didn't have me in mind. You and I are accidental byproducts of nature. There is no objective, mind-independent meaning for our life. We can adopt subjective meanings so we feel better about ourselves or something, but these aren't actually the reasons why we exist.
I mean, I guess that's one way of looking at it. Calling us an accident, I guess you can, but that is a bit loaded language. Because accident implies not only is it not intentional, but unfortunate. I mean, you don't say that you accidentally won the lottery if you found a winning ticket lying in the street, or that you accidentally met the love of your life one day while grocery shopping. These sorts of things would be called good fortune, a happy occurrence, good luck, or just yay for me. Also, accident implies that the outcome could just have easily been completely different. But that really isn't the case either. Because if you rewound time all the way back to the beginning and you let the whole of cosmic history play out all over again, it would all lead right back here to this exact setting. We would be exactly the same. Just like if you rewound a movie all the way to the beginning and let it play out all over again, everything would occur exactly the same way it did the first time you watched it. We aren't just a random accident, we're the inevitable outcome of our universe plus time up to this moment. As far as wanting there to be some greater objective purpose to your life rather than just the subjective meaning you choose for yourself, well, that just sounds to me like wishful thinking. Like you just want to feel more important. And, well...
And facts don't care about your feelings.
How should we live? Well, we could live in a way that's conducive to the flourishing of our group, or we could not. And it doesn't seem to me that we'd be right or wrong to adopt one of these positions if there is no objective moral law.
If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Even if your God exists and wrote incontrovertible moral law, that law would still be subjective. Because that moral law would be based on God's value judgments and interpretations. And all value judgments and all interpretations are subjective. You can only establish morality as objective in reference to a goal. If there's a goal in mind, there is an objectively superior way of achieving it. The idea of divine objective morality is dependent on the goal of living up to God's wishes. That is where theistic objective morality comes from. But if one has a goal of, like you said, living in a way that is conducive to the flourishing of our group, there are certain objectively superior ways of achieving that goal. And so the basis for all morality, even God-derived morality, is subjective, but the objective morality you cling to is just morality that is dependent upon the goal of obeying God. But if there is no God, then there's no God to obey, and that notion of objective morality is bunk. But one can still seek out objectively superior ways of achieving other subjectively derived moralities. Ones that don't say, stone the gays, but instead say, accept gay people as they are because there's nothing freaking wrong with them. Or ones that do not say, take your slaves from the heathens around you, but instead say, don't own people as property. There are objective ways to achieve all of these goals. But the mindset behind establishing these goals in the first place is and always will be entirely subjective, even if a God is the one setting them. And the fact that you would rather set your moral standard as whatever I've been led by religious leaders to believe am the word of big and powerful God, rather than one based on empathy and caring about your fellow human beings, well, that way lies a lot of terrible shit done in the name of gods by supposedly righteous people who were actually monsters and tyrants.
Where are we going? We will die. And not just individually, but collectively as a species. Cosmologists tell us that as the universe continues to expand, there'll eventually be nothing, spreading out through seemingly infinite space, just cosmic soup.
Excuse me, the fuck did you just say?
Okay. You don't have to worry about the species dying out because of cosmic expansion to the point of, I guess, a poorly explained notion of entropy and the eventual heat death of the universe when the universe expands and entropy takes hold to the point of there being no usable energy left for life, and therefore all life ceases. You don't have to worry about that, because the Homo sapien species will most certainly not be around anymore by that point. Even if we don't die out, we will have long since evolved far beyond Homo sapiens. I mean, if current models are accurate, the heat death of the universe is going to occur, which, by the way, isn't a known certainty, but it wouldn't happen for another 1.7 times 10 to the 106th power years. That's a 1 followed by 106 zeros in years. It only took about 3.8 billion years to go from the earliest life forms to us. That's a 3-8 with 8 zeros behind it. What do you think will become of life by the time the heat death happens? Again, if it happens. Don't worry so much about the eventual entropy of the universe. It's so far away that if we continue to evolve and learn more and grow, we'll be creating our own universes by then, and we can just hop into those when this one goes to pot.
None of that is an argument for God existing, of course. It might be that bleak, and we might just have to deal with it. But I'm going to need a good reason to think things are that bleak. And I think when I was a high schooler, I didn't really vibe with Christianity. I didn't like what it taught. I didn't like I didn't believe in the witness of the people who went to church, and so I stopped going. I said I was agnostic. But I think questions like that, like, does it bother you that this is all meaningless? What if it wasn't? Would you want to know? Maybe those are the sorts of questions that could provoke desire to then have a more meaningful discussion about God.
Sounds to me like you just want to feel like there's more to existence than that. What do we say about that, Ben?
And facts don't care about your feelings. I mean, when you talk about that, I think realistically, actually, the agnostic view is even bleaker than that, because you're using active verbs to describe how people can react to the meaninglessness of existence. If you're a pure scientific materialist, the idea that you are self-motivated, that you can self-will, this sort of the ability for existentialists to claim agency that seemingly arises from nowhere, just from the processing of neurons, is something that I think is very difficult to overcome.
Well, not really. I mean, in 1 second, you said that the ability to do things, to have agency, seemingly arises from nowhere. And then a split second later, you say it comes from processing of neurons. Well, the processing of neurons is not nothing, now is it? Why do apologists always say that a naturalistic or materialistic viewpoint insists on everything, or anything, coming from nothing? What is wrong with the notion that humans' ability to do things, to have agency, is a byproduct of our brains? Especially given that we know the entire evolutionary history that led from single-celled organisms, who were just carrying out the most basic of functions, consume, grow, reproduce, and the like, to billions of years of evolution constantly growing in cognitive complexity, to the life that we have today, which is really just carrying out more complex and roundabout versions of those same original functions. Consume, grow, reproduce. Like, the simplicity and intuitive sense that the idea of naturally forming and evolving life makes, I would say, is not only an easy thing to come to grips with in a naturalistic viewpoint, but that it's actually quite difficult for a theistic view to square that. Which is why so many theists outright reject the idea of evolution, because it can't fit into their theology. But even without all of the evidence pointing towards naturalism, the idea of a supposedly perfect being, which would be a being wholly content and complete in its existence, that it desired or needed to create a universe and eventual life forms just so that they would worship it and he could have a relationship with them. Which would mean that this supposedly perfect being was, in fact, not perfect and not complete in and of itself. And that it had desires, and that means that it's fundamentally imperfect. Which means that your perfect God was, in fact, imperfect and therefore fallible in its imperfection. This cuts directly against your theistic axiom of what you envision your divine being to be. Perfect. So the theist has two major problems where this line of argumentation is concerned. The problem of the internal inconsistency of your idea of a perfect creator, and the problem of all of the naturalistic evidence that we see around us. That evidence, like evolution, cognitive drive, and determinism, these things are facts. And of course...
And facts don't care about your feelings. And so it's not even that you can make a sort of Jean-Paul Sartre argument that you can escape the bleakness of existence by acts of will, or the Nietzschean argument. That shouldn't really even exist in a cold materialist universe because, again, you're just a piece of meat wandering through space on a rock, effectively speaking. And so, that sort of argument is, again, it's very difficult, I think, number one, to build an individual life on that basis, and also to build a society on that basis. And furthermore, when I hear people make that argument, because they say, I'll say, so why is that argument important for you to make? And I'll say, well, because it's true. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you're into Alvin Platinga land. Like, okay, well, what do you mean by true? Mm-hmm. What truth exists independent of simple evolutionary biology? You say that it's very important that you know this thing because this thing is true, but does truth have an independent meaning without an independent creator of that truth who stands above that truth?
Yes, truth does have a meaning without a God being standing above that truth. Ben, you're attempting to get into a semantic word game that's coming dangerously close to sounding like presuppositionalism. Oh, how can you know anything without a supernaturally divine being grounding that knowledge in its supernaturalness-ism? Look, true means that which accurately comports with reality. And setting aside the problem of hard solipsism, reality exists based on the evidence that we all experience a shared reality every moment of every day. And the most logical choice we can make in regards to that experience of reality is to move forward as though that reality were real and true. And what's so frustratingly irritating about this idea of needing some creator being to ground that truth in order for it to be real is that, Ben, you do exactly the same thing as any non-believer. You experience the same shared reality, and you have no reasonable choice but to move forward as if that reality were real. The only difference is that you choose to believe that that reality is grounded by your chosen creator being. Meanwhile, a Hindu does the same thing, but with the belief that reality is grounded by their chosen creator being. Meanwhile, thousands of years ago, Egyptians did the same thing, but with their belief that reality was grounded by their chosen creator beings. And so on and so forth. Whether your chosen creator being exists or not has no effect on how you experience or deal with reality. It only affects your perception and belief about a creator being behind it all. And much like how you think those Egyptians were wrong, and you think those Hindus are wrong, and they and many others think that you are wrong, we all still experience the same shared reality. And I see no reason to assert that that reality is grounded in your chosen creator being, nor anyone else's. Frankly, I see no reason to think that there is a need for any creator being of any kind. Existence seems axiomatic, because non-existence appears as nothing more than a thought experiment. Near as I can tell, nothing can't exist. Because if nothing existed, then it wouldn't be nothing. It would be something. So if everything existing is an inescapable reality, then it just becomes a question of what form everything exists as. And we've already been over that. Things existing the way that they currently do was an inevitability. Rewind the whole of history back to the first moment, let it all play out again, and we all end up right back here just like this. I see no need for there to be any creator being in any of it. And neither you nor Matt have given me any reason to think so here today. It really just seems to come down to you want there to be something more. Matt wants there to be a deeper spiritual meaning to life. Ben wants there to be some cosmic superpower underpinning all of reality and being the divine cause of his agency, thereby making him more important and special than something that just came about as a cosmic accident. They want, they need, they feel.
I want, me, mine, now.
Well, quite frankly, all that seems a lot less like facts and a lot more like feelings, and as we all know...
And facts don't care about your feelings.
Matt and Ben do talk for about an hour and a half, and all sorts of theology discussion comes up at some point, so there may be more tidbits to delve into in a future date, but that's about all the feelings-laden apologetics my pink puffball triple self can take for one day. But before we go, I want to shout out a couple of Plink fan artists. This first piece came in from a fan referring to themselves as Secular Idiot. Though in my estimation, there's nothing idiotic about being secular. But of course, one adjective may have nothing to do with the other, like someone calling themselves a bald North Dakotan. The second piece comes to us from Gimonver, really capturing the sky blue of my giant eye. Anyone else who would like to send in fan art can do so by sending it to my email listed below in the description. But with that said, that is where we will end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Don't forget to check me out on Twitter and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merchandise. All that linked below in the description. Special shout out to my most recent super thanker here on YouTube, Salvi Mike. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.